On this episode of Charged and Disbarred.
When you take 5 cents from a client, you fired his hope. That can become very psychological in some people. When he finds out he's been gulled, they want to come and shoot you.
Tim had to have it all. He had to have the mansion, he had to have the yacht, he had to have the cars. He viewed himself as a Hugh Hefner. What he turned out to be was another Bernie Madoff.
Judges and attorneys are like kings and knights in their own realm. It is unthinkable that in a moment of madness it can all be thrown away. Charged and Disbarred explores the true life stories of attorneys who have fallen from grace. Hear firsthand accounts from the victims, detectives, and prosecutors who brought these disgraced attorneys to justice. This is Charged and Disbarred. Busy Park Avenue in Manhattan. The world-famous Hemsley building stands near Grand Central Station. The stately 1929 New York landmark's reputable tenants include Comerica Bank and Encyclopedia Britannica. Its classic architecture has been seen in movies such as The Godfather and Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. Park Avenue itself suggests wealth and a uniquely American brand of luxury. For Angelina Codina, her Park Avenue address was only one part of an operation that spanned continents. Posh offices, branding, an ad campaign. These helped her defraud at least 1,000 victims. But worse than taking just their savings, this internationally known attorney robbed people of hopes and dreams.
We all know about Angie. If you're an immigration lawyer, you would know about Angie. Codina, we're not sure whether it's Codina or Kodina because she uses the alternative. And she also uses a company called Codina International Limited, and even disguising her services.
Angelina Codina is a Canadian national who is a native of Uruguay. She joined the Law Society of Upper Canada in 1983 and may speak as many as 7 different languages. With a promising career in front of her and published law articles behind her, Codina went into the field of immigration law. She built her resume working for respected firms in Toronto before going into practice for herself.
She very quickly found out that you can extract money from an immigrant fairly easily. She sold herself as a person with offices all over the world.
Codina offered consulting and legal services to people internationally who wanted to immigrate mainly to the United States and Canada. Immigration law clients are often vulnerable for a variety of reasons. Language is a barrier, they generally lack an understanding of how the system is supposed to work, they're also chasing a dream, which makes them easier to fool and exploit.
So it's a variety of interesting problems that arise from Ms. Codina's work. Mostly it's been non-finished. Mostly people seem to be unsatisfied. Mostly people can't get answers to their questions. Mostly people from all over the world.
She began Codina International with offices in 9 major cities. Codina advertised widely and people contacted her from all over.
Their English speaking was limited, and basically it was an aunt who used up her savings in Romania so her student's nephew in Toronto could obtain permanent status, that kind of thing. It was always people who had money overseas who used up their life savings, and they were convinced. They said, this woman has offices in Paris and New York and all over the world. And I'm not sure what she has all over the world, but the people were impressed. When you take 5 cents from a client, you fired his hope. And that can become very psychological in some people. When he finds out he's been gulled, they want to come and shoot you.
The first major hit to Codina's reputation came 10 years into her career. In 1993, she was convicted and sentenced to 6 months in jail for advising a client to lie on his immigration papers. She appealed and was convicted a second time. However, the charges were eventually stayed and she continued her international practice. But complaints against Codina continued to mount. They mainly consisted of people who were promised or falsely promised legal services that were either never performed or should never have been offered.
Ethnic immigration crime is rampant in the province of Ontario where I practice, and based upon my experience, somebody who is either not authorized or, if authorized, practicing on the very thin skin.
In 1997, Kadena was again charged in Canada. This time, she was convicted of one count of fraud for billing the Ontario Legal Aid Plan in 1991 and 1992 for services she did not perform. Kadena promptly began the appeals process on her conviction, hoping to get this one overturned as she had her 1993 conviction. Meanwhile, Kadena was doing business from the Helmsley Building in Manhattan. Her activities there attracted the attention of crusading New York Attorney General Eliot Spitzer. In 2000, after an investigation into 17 different complaints to the AG's office, she was arrested and locked up at Rikers Island Prison. Charges included 2 counts of a scheme to defraud in the first degree, 10 counts of grand larceny in the third degree, 1 count of grand larceny in the fourth degree, and 14 counts of practicing law without being admitted to the bar in New York or registered in New York. Kadena was accused of fraudulently collecting legal fees in excess of $260,000.
The ability to prosecute this kind of offense is of no particular interest to the authorities in Toronto. There's a variety of reasons for that, of course. A client would come to you and say, oh, I paid him or her $20,000 and I don't have a result. And I would take a look at the case and find that the person just committed straight out and out fraud by representing that he or she could do something without being able to do it.
The charges in New York claim Kadena falsely advertised that the firm was qualified to provide legal assistance on work visas, green cards, and refugee applications. Spitzer said of the Canadian attorney, Kadena turned the dream of American residency and citizenship into nightmares for those who hired her. The type of crimes Kadena was alleged to have committed resemble common immigration law schemes seen around the world. Victims are usually foreign nationals, lay across borders, lack language skills, or any real way to complain. If they're already in the country, either illegally or illegally, they fear that reporting the ripoff to the police will endanger their immigration status, and with good reason. Immigration applications submitted by fraudulent organizations, if they bother to file papers at all, have been known to alert authorities to the presence of illegal aliens. On top of losing their money, victims may receive deportation papers. Meanwhile, fraudsters tell them it's all part of the process. But really, it may be all part of the scam. The Federal District Court in New York found Kadena was guilty as charged. She was sentenced to serve between 9 and 28 years in a New York federal women's prison.
The judge down there convicted her of acting illegally because she was not a representative member of the immigration bar, unlicensed, and gave her 10 years.
Kadena managed to rig off the hook in New York, but she faced still more legal challenges at home in Toronto. Her appeals for her 1997 conviction regarding defrauding Ontario legal aid had finally run out. An appeals judge ruled that the conviction should stand. Kadena now faced disciplinary charges before the Law Society of Upper Ontario for this conviction, some 5 years after she was first found guilty.
She was convicted of conduct unbecoming a solicitor, and for fraud, and for defrauding the legal aid of monies over $1,000. She's disbarred, she's not authorized, she's not licensed. The rules of a disbarred lawyer prevent her from even entering into the arena with another employer.
Over the years, some of Kadena's unhappy clients even sued her in small claims court. This strategy resulted in numerous judgments against her, but collecting on these judgments was a whole other challenge.
From time to time, I heard about her. And then I got one case in who was really, really upset. And the same kind of thing. Spend a lot of money for a case that couldn't be done. Couldn't possibly be done. At that time, I did a research on her monetary background and found out that she owed the Bank of Nova Scotia $30,000 in an execution filed. So I said, sir, I don't think there's any use, any practical use, to spend a lot of money on me to chase this woman, especially we have to hire an expert to show how she was negligent. He managed to settle his case as against her and managed to pull out about $5,000.
Codina's legal career might have ended when her license to practice law was revoked. However, Codina maintained her position as director of Codina Immigration Consultants, known as CIC. It's worth noting that CIC mimics the abbreviation for the Canadian government's immigration agency, Citizenship and Immigration of Canada, widely referred to as the CIC. And it's this kind of detail that might easily confuse clients into thinking Codina operates under the auspices of the Canadian government. Pretty bold for an individual forbidden to practice law. But something changed in 2011. An amendment to Canada's immigration law went into effect. Bill C-35 was entitled the Cracking Down on Crooked Consultants Act. The law makes it a crime for unauthorized individuals to charge money for Canadian immigration advice or legal services. Shortly after the law went into effect, Canadian authorities opened an investigation targeting Angelina Codina, nicknamed False Angel. Ongoing complaints against Codina suggested she was actively and improperly consulting on immigration cases and possibly practicing law illegally in Canada. After a 3-year investigation on May 8, 2014, Codina was arrested by the Canada Border Service Agency and charged with 5 counts under the amended Immigration and Refugee Protection Act.
My involvement became as a watchdog. I've been watching the ICCRC prosecution for her against acting without authority, without a license. And it's being fought. This case is being fought for 1.5 years. And I've had a man go down and is adjourned, disclosure after disclosure after disclosure.
The most amazing feature of Codina's long career might be her ability to stay the course. She has ignored reprimands, convictions, court orders, borders, ethical standards, and her own oath before the court, all so she could continue to make false promises to an endless stream of clients. The immigration law scam relies on the victim's willingness to believe. The dream of coming to America or Canada, even becoming a citizen, is the stuff of mythology. Codina has proven to be resourceful in her ability to adapt and reinvent herself. Her operation has been called by various names and under who knows how many aliases, and ads in foreign newspapers in faraway places, mainly out of the view of U.S. and Canadian officials.
It's very technical, very complicated. I think there has to be a special international immigration police force. It's not the wasted dollars, it's the wasted savings of people that is shocking and terrible. It's tragic. You can imagine these people nickel by nickel saving for their life, and all's gone down so their nephew can come to Canada or their relative can come to Canada, and it's wasted. There will always be, like the song, "There'll always be in England," there'll always be an Angie Codina. It's just our job to ferret these people out and to prevent and to minimize their damage. It's that simple. She's a diminutive woman with a blonde, upswept hair, and she won't be happy when I say this. Used to be pretty. I see the vulgarity in her. The horror what she does is creeps out in her skin. She has a small, diminutive voice. She managed to say things that people believe when it's not true. It's marvelous. I wish I could do it.
Still to come on Charged and Disbarred.
Tim had to have it all. He had to have the mansion. He had to have the yacht. He had to have the multiple cars. He viewed himself as a Hugh Hefner. What he turned out to be was another Bernie Madoff.
This is Charged and Disbarred. Seymour, Indiana, population 17,503, the heartland of America. Known for its hardworking, honest people, modesty, friendliness, and fairness are considered bedrock values here. In a small town like Seymour, one's reputation means everything. A person's word is his or her bond, and the long tradition of faith, agriculture, and hard winters means that neighbors show up to help one another. Community, family. Attorney and financier Timothy Sean Durham Sr. grew up here, in the same fabled small town as John Cougar Mellencamp. Seymour is nicknamed the Crossroads of America for the two major rail lines that come together on the prairie. And given the strange tale of Tim Durham, one has to wonder if he might have met the devil at the crossroads one night and made a foolish bargain. Despite his promising career and obvious talent as a lawyer, Durham's ideals would reveal themselves to be in perfect opposition to the Midwestern values of his rural Indiana upbringing.
So Tim Durham was an attorney originally. He grew up in Indiana. He attended University of Indiana Law School, graduated from law school in 1985. Tim didn't stay in the practice of law very long.
Right out of law school, Durham went to work for Ice Miller, a prestigious 100-year-old law firm in downtown Indianapolis. The legacy of Harry Ice, who died a few years before Durham took up the law, had been legal specialization. And there was only one specialty that interested Durham: making money. In 1989, Durham married Joan Servas. Her father, Bert Servas, was a respected financier and a longtime Indiana city councilman with influential ties. He owned a successful real estate investment firm. Servas recognized Durham's ambition and took the successful young attorney under his wing to teach him the family business, leveraged buyouts.
In the mid-1990s, he got out of the law practice entirely and became a businessman, really. He started investing in companies that were distressed. And over the course of the next decade, he would incorporate an organization that invested in distressed companies.
A leveraged buyout is a business strategy where an outside investor buys a controlling stake in a distressed company. The money used to buy in becomes a debt that attaches to the company after the sale. Like flipping a house, investors then make cosmetic changes, reduce staff and overhead, maybe cook the books a little, then flip the company back onto the market to sell for a profit. The purchase debt is left behind while the investor walks away with the cash, robbing the company of its value. Throughout the 80s and 90s, this pattern ruined many businesses and made investors rich. Tim Durham quickly developed a knack for leveraged buyouts with his father-in-law as a mentor. In 1998, Durham divorced Joan Servas and left her father's company to start Obsidian Enterprises. Where his earlier success with Servas's firm had involved stable, sensible companies, Durham set his sights on companies that were a little sexier. Companies that might support his oft-stated ambition to become the richest man in the world. And if he could upgrade his lifestyle through his investments along the way, so much the better.
So in 2002, Tim Durham and two of his partners bought a company called Fair Finance. It basically bought and sold commercial debt, and it was an excellent company that had run in business for 30, 40, 50 years. Had many investors who had done very well in the company. It wasn't a sexy company. It wasn't a company that was going to be providing 50% returns per year, but it was considered a very safe company to invest in and had thousands of people who had invested in the company over the years.
Durham and his partners paid $23 million for Fair Financial. Now, instead of buses, Durham used Fair Finance assets to invest in a limousine company. Instead of cargo trailers, he put his newfound money into a race car, a plastic surgeon, an automotive magazine, a nightclub, even the entertainment brand National Lampoon. And to see Durham's lifestyle, his company appeared to be rolling in money.
Tim had to have it all. He had to have the mansion, he had to have the yacht, he had to have the multiple cars, and he viewed himself as a playboy. In fact, he threw himself an extravagant birthday party where he had Playboy bunnies come to his mansion, and it was just a debacle.
It turned out this was not because Obsidian was making money, it was because Durham was spending money. A lot of money. Those Midwestern values, modesty, reliability, transparency, were nowhere to be found. Not in his 30,000 square foot mansion in Fortville in the outskirts of Indianapolis, not in the 5-figure and 6-figure donations to politicians, nor in his love affair with the plastic side of Los Angeles.
Tim Durham decided he was going to change the business model of fair finance. He and his partners started taking in money from thousands of investors. And over the period from 2005 till 2009, he took in roughly $230 million in investments from thousands of individuals.
The 68-year-old Fair Finance in Akron, Ohio had been a local family-operated business. It had been the equivalent of a blue-chip investment for many hardworking Ohio farmers and civil servants. It worked somewhat like a payday loan company, only Fair Finance made loans to businesses based on future income instead of individuals and at a fair interest rate. Most of the mom-and-pop investors didn't even realize the company had changed hands. Meanwhile, any duty to his investors Durham might have had as an officer of the court was not even a consideration.
What Tim did, though, instead of paying returns on that money to the investors, was he started making loans with that money to himself, to his other business interests, and actually started taking the money out of the company and paying it to himself and to his co-owners, as well as a gaggle of friends who were hanging on.
Given this fact, Durham must have known what he was doing was illegal. He created a web of complex relationships used to funnel money into this tangle of entities which were his own worthless businesses. Only one of his businesses turned out to be a going concern. Ironically, it was a trailer manufacturing company.
Within a matter of 4 years, this Fair Finance, which was such a strong company and so well known for many years, had been completely looted by Mr. Durham. He sucked all of the assets out of the company. Now, when investors started seeking to get their money back, Tim did a classic Ponzi scheme. He brought in new investors to pay off old investors to keep the operation running. But after a while, there were too many people calling in on their debts and trying to get money back out of Fair Finance, and not enough money in the company to take it. By around 2010, there was really no money left at all in Fair Finance to pay out to anybody.
While the economic downturn in 2008 certainly impacted every business, Durham's scheme suffered when investors came to withdraw their funds. This phenomenon had exposed Bernie Madoff's elaborate Ponzi scheme as well. New investors had to be recruited fast enough to replace missing funds so they could be used to cover the old investors on the Ponzi merry-go-round. In November 2009, the FBI raided the Indianapolis penthouse offices of Fair Finance and the offices in Akron. The FBI had been listening to Durham's phone calls for some time and had recently questioned Durham. Federal investigators had seen enough to know that if they failed to move fast, there would be nothing left to recover.
One of the sad facts of the Tim Durham case is that it affected thousands of individual investors. These were retirees. These were people who had invested in Fair Finance for decades and had viewed it as a very safe investment. People across all walks of life lost their entire investment savings because of Tim Durham.
In a 23-page indictment, the grand jury alleged that 5,200 investors lost $230 million in the scheme. The indictment was finally issued a year and a half after the FBI raid. Durham was living in Los Angeles, California, running the National Lampoon brand. He was extradited to Indiana.
The sole purpose for Tim's stealing of hundreds of millions of dollars from Fair Finance was to fund his own lavish lifestyle. He viewed himself as a Hugh Hefner wannabe. What he turned out to be was another Bernie Madoff.
The prosecution had plenty of evidence that Durham planned to loot Fair Finance. In a 2008 email between Durham and Fair Finance's attorney, Ronald Caffin, Caffin told Durham, "While it is true that most of the new funds are now used to replace redeemed certificates, I am not comfortable characterizing the sales as selling certificates to pay off old certificates. Such a characterization would not be much different than a pyramid scheme.
The outcome of the prosecution didn't turn out very well for Mr. Durham. He received a penalty of 50 years of incarceration in federal prison.
On June 20th, 2012, an Indianapolis jury convicted Durham of 10 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of securities fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud. Durham was facing a maximum possible sentence of 225 years.
Mr. Durham actually sought 3 years of prison time. The government, on the other hand, sought life in prison. So when the court imposed a 50-year sentence, I think the government got closer to what it wanted. Mr. Durham, unless he lives to be over 100 years of age, will be in prison for the rest of his life. The fact that Mr. Durham sought a 3-year sentence tells me that he must have been delusional in thinking that he didn't really do anything that was all that wrong. He didn't appreciate the magnitude of the harm that he did. He ruined the lives of thousands of small-time Midwestern investors. I might also add that this occurred in Indiana, and Indiana is known for giving out fairly stiff punishments for criminal misconduct. In fact, Mr. Durham's punishment was the stiffest sentence ever given out for a white-collar crime in Indiana history. And frankly, with the government going for a lifetime sentence and him going for a 3-year sentence, the bargaining there isn't splitting the difference. The court is either going to see this as an offense that's worthy of a lifetime of imprisonment, or they're going to ignore all of the facts of the case and essentially give him what he wanted, which was just a slap on the wrist.
2 of the wire fraud convictions were later overturned, but his 50-year prison sentence remains unchanged.
So in addition to his criminal prosecution, Mr. Durham was also prosecuted by the Indiana State Bar. Now this was probably the least of his concerns after getting a 50-year prison sentence, but the Indiana Bar did prosecute him for his felonious acts, and he was ultimately disbarred in 2016. It was a no-brainer that the Indiana Supreme Court was ultimately going to charge him with unethical conduct, that he really didn't bother fighting.
The amount of money recovered from the sale of Durham's assets offered the fair finance investors only a small recovery of their investments.
Victims ultimately received pennies on the dollar. That's the real sad part of the story. Approximately 10% of the proceeds from their investments were ultimately recovered. My personal feelings about the Durham case is that he got the appropriate sentence. There's no question that thousands of individuals were harmed. There was no excuse offered. It was just a matter of pure greed. It may seem odd that after getting a 50-year sentence that the bar would even care to do anything about his law license. But the bar does care about attorneys and their character and their conduct. What matters is that Tim ultimately was a thief and a con artist. And the bar doesn't want thieves and con artists as members of the bar.